Welcome. Welcome to this month's Human Capital Watch. As many of you know, this is our monthly series covering many things in the human capital area. I'm very excited to be talking to you today. I'm Amy Abel. I am the Managing Director for Human Capital here at the Conference Board and a researcher for many of the different topics, including the one we're talking about today. What's next for 21st century HR? Continuous strategic transformation. This is a big topic, and we have received quite a lot of interest from members such as yourselves and organizations that are really thinking, doing, and actioning what we're calling 21st century HR. So some critical questions and issues that we will answer today on this webcast is, what are the significant components required for transforming HR? Just because we all want to transform, do we know what we are transforming? Do we know what we should transform versus what we should not be transforming? And are we transforming and making progress in the right direction? And we'll cover a lot of this topic and think a little bit more deeply about some of this today on our webcast. Just some housekeeping items I really would ask and invite you to join us in this conversation by asking questions on this webcast by typing questions in your lower left-hand box. You can download the presentation. You can view this video in full screen and the PowerPoint slides. You can also download this, by the way, as you can see in the download box on your screen. At the end of this webcast, we have a very brief evaluation. It'll take you less than a minute or so. We really do value your feedback, so please let us know how we're doing and if you have any suggestions on how we can enhance. And finally, our program is recorded so that you can view this on demand later and share with perhaps others on your teams. And if you're interested in CPE credits, you can follow the instructions on what you need to do here for the different types of credits that you have. Mostly it's obviously type in your name, and if you're for the CPE ones, you have to click OK when the pop-up buttons appear. Okay, terrific. So today, let me first briefly go over to my presenter and colleague and co-researcher is Marion Devine. I do have another housekeeping remark, which is we had another speaker scheduled for today, and my most humblest apologies. It was a personal emergency, and they're not able to join us for today. But have no fear, we have a lot of corporate stories to tell you. We want to tell you what HR transformation is looking like for many organizations, and we'll give you real examples of what companies are actually doing and struggling with and challenged with, and how are they taking on this journey for HR transformation. So before I do that, Marion, would you mind, I just wanted to have you quickly introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everybody. As Amy says, I'm Marion Devine. I'm a senior researcher with the Conference Board, and I'm based in Europe.
Thanks, Marion. So let me sort of set the stage. We're talking about transforming HR. We have a lot of questions. Sometimes we talk to companies like yourselves where they ask, what's going on? Why the call for change? And so you probably have seen a lot of this in our publications, in the public world, online. Lots of articles have come out over the last several years, including these Fast Company HBR articles. It's time to blow up HR, why we hate HR, what can we do about it? Is it time to fix HR? Lots of these titles that are going on. And I'm, for one, frankly, a little bit tired of seeing some of these article titles, and you might be as well. As an HR practitioner and professional, I think there is some pull, there is some foundation to this need and this call for change. And you know what it's from is that lots of businesses, the world is changing. Business is changing. It's not surprising that HR needs to change as well. Lots of chaos going on in our business environments, and it's not possible to assume that HR does not need to change significantly along with the business strategy. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this, right? So many of the HR professionals I talk to, sometimes they struggle with, how do we articulate this burning platform, the need for transformation? What's going on in the world today that requires us to change? So these are, by the way, just some elements on the slide that you see of the world in which we're dealing with. So first, data, data, data. And I have some stats from a lot of sort of publicly available research. Did you know, for example, that we now have 9 times more data today than in the last 2 years alone. So this is a tsunami of data is what I would call it. And as many of you may imagine, data is an enabler of machine learning, right? That changes the paradigm a little bit in what we do, and I'll talk about that in a second. The future of work. Careers are different. How we do work is different. Something as simple as teleworking or about skill sets that many of us HR practitioners care about for our employee base. The life skill or the length of skill that employees now retain for their work is estimated to be about 2.5 to 5 years long. What that means is every 5 years we need new skills. Your entire employee staff may need new skills in about every 2 to 5 years. That's a huge amount of need and a huge pressure for many of us in HR responsible for enabling and supporting our employees. Also, the average tenure of a job is now 4.5 years. Right? We know this. We know we have a lot of literature on millennials, whether they stay, whether they go. What does that mean from our employee base and workforce perspective? Technology everywhere. We all know this, right? Everything, we're trying to Uberize everything in the world. There are 6 billion plus smartphones in the world estimated by 2020. What do we do with all of that? Contingent workers rising. That is a very interesting element, by the way, one of which that I'm doing a new research on, currently researching about, contingent workers in our workforce. I have a stat that says it's an explosion. The U.S. level of contingent workers will be estimated to be about 40% by 2020. 40%. That seems pretty high, that we're all, apparently 40% will be contingent workers. And what does that mean? How do we engage with this? Do we need to develop them? How do we manage them? How do we use them to increase our productivity and better support our customers in our companies? Demographic and generational changes, lots of demographic changes, and we actually will not have time today, but many of you may know we do a lot of labor markets research, and the economics around just the demographic shift. In the U.S. alone, we are now seeing a decline in working age population that will be consistent for the next 10 to 15 years. There are not enough people coming into the workforce as those that are exiting the workforce. And there are many reasons for that, but you will not have enough people. And this is true of many mature economies around the world. You go to countries like Japan, Germany, US is right alongside with that. We have a labor shortage problem, and you can see that reflected in our unemployment rates right around the country that have been historically now low. Generational changes, 5 generations in the workplace. Millennials now take over 50% of our workforce. What does that mean? And finally, AI, artificial intelligence, automation, robotics, another very dramatic change going on in our workforce. I have another stat that says jobs vulnerable to automation per country. In the UK, I have an estimation, 35% of jobs will be vulnerable to automation. In the US, 40%, 47% of jobs will be vulnerable to automation. In China, 77% of jobs will be vulnerable to automation. Okay, that's actually overwhelming to think about and the implications of that. So as a brief summary, these are some dramatic changes and opportunities that are going on in our business world and in our world at large. Do you have leaders that are capable of supporting these changes? In many of the executives that I talk to, they would say no, that their leaders are not ready and are not prepared to handle not even all of these changes, but even some of these changes. And there's a lot of struggle with what organizations are trying to do, which again leads us to our conversation for today. So we are transforming HR for the future. This is a brand new report that was released right at the end of last year, so end of 2017, and really for 2018. So this is relatively hot off the press. We're very excited about this report. First, you can see the 3 different organizations that we cover in this report, John Deere, Royal Bank of Scotland, and Daiichi Sankyo as case studies, 3 different organizations, 3 different industries, global organizations, all approaching this transformation effort in different ways. So that's one key message that we will be conveying to you again and again throughout this webcast, is that there is no recipe, right? There is no step-by-step guidebook, but we will provide you with elements, components, tools to actually be very tactical and think about this strategic problem, but in some tactical ways. And we will guide you through all of that. One thing one aspect of this report I wanted to share with you is that this was actually driven by our HR Business Partner Council. Many of you may be familiar with our councils at the conference board, and these are executives that gather and talk about the most pressing issues on their plate. They came to us as a research organization and as a council at the conference board to say, we need to investigate and talk about and think deeper about what is next for 21st century HR. What does that mean if we want to be in the future? What does that mean if we need to change? What should we be changing? And these were some of the questions that I posed earlier on in our slide. We've got 500 million things on our plate every day. Which things should we be more focused on that will actually have greater impact on transforming HR versus the other 499 things that we have on our plate that may be important? They're all important, but perhaps less strategic to what we need to do. So let me, with that, invite Marion into the conversation and sort of tell us a little bit. This slide, while simple and a little bit graphical, tells us a little bit about what does 21st century HR look like. And I, again, want to invite you in the audience to type in your questions as we continue this conversation into the chat box on your lower left-hand corner. So Marion, please.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, I think this model, this bubble came about really through by the end of our research when we were seeing HR transforming, and it was, what is this HR that's coming out? What is 21st century HR? And when we've used this diagram with some of our members, there's often a aha moment where they say, that makes sense. That does describe where we're heading. So it's very much, I suppose you could call it an agile HR. But, what does agile HR mean? This is what we think it means. We think it means a HR function that is constantly transforming. So we don't think that HR transformation is actually a change journey from A to B. So from one steady state to a new steady state. We don't think it's that. We think it's a constant evolving journey. HR is constantly really, really trying to fail fast, learn from its experiences, learn faster than its competitors, just generally really try to recover from setbacks and adapt to constantly changing situations. And this part of this is constant transformation. It is needing to be quite resilient, and that's an issue, I think, for companies that we talk to, of just being resilient in the face of this need to keep changing. And it's innovative. I think not very long ago, we would not necessarily have connected innovation with HR, but I think HR is increasingly becoming deeply aware of innovation and its role in innovation. And we've done ourselves research into the signposts of innovation, we're calling it, and the company infrastructure, meaning the culture, the values, the whole sort of workplace environment is a really, really strong aspect of innovation. And that is right in HR's domain. So the companies that we've looked at are really aspiring to just become, to really develop a culture of disruptive thinking, of challenging the business, of helping to generate new ideas, and just keep experimenting. Connective. I think that we're very aware that 21st century HR is really coming out of its ivory tower. I'm not even sure it ever was in its ivory tower, to be honest, in some of the most sophisticated companies. But it's really understanding that it's serving multiple stakeholders, that the customer is now something that HR is really reaching out and touching. HR is connecting its efforts to what's happening at the coalface with the customer. And also the employee, as Amy said, with labor becoming a really very precious commodity, understanding the employee, giving employees what they want from the workplace is really, really important. And part of that connectedness is about breaking down silos, helping the organization to really break down silos in terms of thinking, silos in terms of function, and HR is moving to work across the business in a very sort of horizontal way. And that brings us next to, in terms of being a sort of horizontal, more thinking function and operating horizontally, means that it's relational. I think that anyone in HR today will realize that success really does depend on building relationships, building trust, credibility, influence, not just with the C-suite, not just with the leaders of a business unit, but also with employees. They really have to establish that credibility so that HR can listen, understand the business, respond to the needs of the business. And something that I think is very evident in these last 2 to 3 years is this explosion of data, as Amy has said. This is revolutionizing, transforming HR as we speak, that HR now is getting the wherewithal and the tools to access huge volumes of data that are giving it new insight into how to get the very best from people, how to build the best workplaces, how to maximize productivity. Leveraging expertise as well, intelligence and insight. We're hearing HR constantly talking about the need to provide that story to the business, a compelling story of the need for a change, a compelling story of why we need to work differently. And much of that is about intelligence and insight derived from big data, derived from spotting new trends, new patterns. And finally, creating conditions, not programs. Not so very long ago, if you were doing a company profile of a HR function, they would be telling you this, we have this program and we have that program and we have this program. And that's, to me, personally, I've really seen a shift in that companies, HRs, functions, HR leaders are actually thinking about the conditions for change, the conditions for innovation. They're thinking about culture, values, employee experience. They're thinking about how to create workplaces and inclusive cultures where some of these ways of changing can come about, and then maybe a program is slotted in, but it's built on an infrastructure now, I think, of culture, values, very clear-sighted priorities of the business, helped by data and analytics. So I think that that's a very important shift. So taken all together, we think this is what people are talking about when they talk about 21st century HR or agile HR, and that's what we've seen in our research.
Terrific. Thanks, Marian. I'd like to, I think we have found high reception from many of our members and executives that we talk to on the HR side about this, because while, there's a couple of bubbles around the circle, these words that we put in are very challenging, I think, to many of us that have been in HR for a long time. So my two favorite, for example, you started off around constantly transforming, right? Fail fast, learn faster. These are not the words that we historically used in HR. And how do we have a different mindset around that? And then my other favorite, of course, is creating conditions, not programs, which you articulated so well around, whether it's the culture or the employee experience, or what is it that we're thinking about from a condition perspective, which is much harder to do. Right? As a former director of leadership development, I know how to run programs. And this is what many of us know how to do, right? We know how to run programs, but that's not of course we still need programs. Of course we want to have programs, but creating the condition that enables and empowers employees sort of to do what they need to do is very different than sort of putting together, a 2-day program. So that causes a lot of angst, I think, in many of the HR practitioners that we talk to. And what does that mean for themselves? What does that mean for their organization, HR, and of course for their businesses at large? So let me go ahead and build on what Marian was just talking about, which is, so we've kind of, in a very bigger picture way, explained to you with the last slide on what what does it mean to be a 21st century HR organization? Right, so we've laid out some characteristics for you. Well, now we want to dig a little deeper. This is where we get a little more tactical. Are there elements that are more impactful to change and focus on versus other elements? And in our research, in talking to a lot of different companies, including many of the case studies that we had, what we found were these 6 core elements that we would encourage you think and talk and have conversations about with your colleagues that perhaps may have a greater impact on your goal of transforming HR than on other things. We're going to break this down a little bit in each of the 6 components right now, and we're going to bring you examples of what companies are actually doing within each of these 6 components. And they vary. Again, everybody does it a little bit differently, so this is not a recipe book, but we will bring to you elements that you should consider. And by the way, before I forget, there's for you're all members of the conference board, there is a diagnostic tool on the webpage of this report where we basically take these 6 components and we have essentially sort of a conversation starter checklist, if you will. Again, not a step-by-step guide, but a checklist to start conversations on how are you doing across these 6 elements. This is a terrific conversation to have with your senior leaders as well as within your own teams. And as you sort of think about and reflect, how are we doing in our transformation process? How are we doing on our journey? And are we focused on the right things? So I would encourage you to look ahead at that diagnostic tool. So we'll go through the 6 elements, and not surprisingly, with any transformation process, there are phases of transformation. And this is what we want to highlight, again, not in great detail at this webcast, but there are phases that you need to think about and assess where you are at in this current phase. Are you at the initiation phase where you're activating the transformational process? Are you at the scaling phase where you're trying to bring this about across the enterprise and you act more of a change agent? Whether you're sustaining the transformation as an integrator, right? This is where it's integrated across HR, beyond HR, inside, outside the company. And are you then finally continuously transforming as HR as the innovator? So this is a role for individuals as well as for the HR function, for you to think about what is the role that you're playing and how can you play perhaps some more of these roles that you want to get to from a transformational process. And what's also interesting about this transformation is that there's not necessarily an end state, right? Those of you may remember Kurt Lewin's, unfreeze, change, and refreeze. The fact that we're using the words continuously transforming as a quote-unquote end state indicates that there really isn't a refreezing moment. We are in the world of constant change. The businesses will be constantly changing. Therefore, HR would also be constantly changing. So with that, let me dig into a little bit of the different elements that we have of these core components. And what we'd like to do is, obviously, apologies that these slides are obviously very small fonts. I'm not going to read to you the entire slide. This is all in the report, which all of you have access to. I wanted to highlight the 6 core elements. What are they? What do they mean? And of course, Marion will help me sort of share some examples of what companies are doing. So the first element is aligning HR to business strategy. And, again, this sounds pretty obvious. We all will say, of course, HR is aligned to business strategy. But what does that mean? Are you able to communicate the HR vision to senior management as it aligns to the business strategy? Are you reorganizing HR between shared services, centers of excellence, matrices, right? Alignment is about not just your org structure, but also about your processes. Are your org structures and processes aligned to the strategy in the most appropriate manner, or are they really org charts that we just have had forever and they seem to cause a lot of problems, but we really can't realign for whatever reason? Right? If you're in the sustaining mode where you're integrating your systems in alignment, you're building seamless connections across the organization. You're collaborating with other functions and cross-functional committees inside and outside of HR to lead efforts around this transformation, right? And HR may even serve as a talent hotspot for HR and non-HR people to gain experience around talent issues and talent management, right? And finally, are you architecting new strategies and new HR models that deliver business value? You're constantly changing that model in whatever way that's appropriate to do that. Now, I know that sounds quite big and lofty, and Marian, maybe you can share some examples of how some organizations are doing this.
Yes, Amy. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Trying to sort of understand this and put it down to the level of a company. I think the thing that's really struck me in terms of aligning HR to the business strategy, we wondered if there was going to be a new operational model out there. Was it going to be still the ALRIC model, or was there going to be something very interesting and different? And in fact, what we found is that most of our companies that we talked to and did case studies around are really going with the same model. It is still centers of expertise, it is still shared services, and it is some sort of embedded HR. And I think that something that we've seen across the case studies is global HR is really working hard now to absolutely tie its efforts in with the business strategy. So I think there's sort of a realignment of really beefing up the global HR part of HR to have really highly qualified, very business experienced HR leaders. Centers of expertise are being used to very much formulate policy. And something that I've noticed is that companies are varying in what they are grouping into the centers of expertise. And again, it depends on the company and what you are prioritized that you feel that you really need to get ahead of in terms of the latest thinking. Reward seems to be one area that is definitely being put into centers of expertise. But one of our companies has also put in employee relations. Another company opted to put in talent into the centre of expertise, whereas some of our businesses are keeping talent very much within the embedded HR teams and the global HR teams. So it really varies. And I think the message that we have is really to say that they're not reinventing. It's not a case of reinventing the HR model, but it's a case of realigning it, refining it, and really using the power of business insight, data, HR technology to really sort of say, how can we maximize these structures? Do we need to move some things out of the global area into the centers of expertise? Do we need to bring things back in? And one of our companies in a council a couple of weeks ago, they've actually made the decision to totally bring back HR admin that they had outsourced and shared services. They're actually bringing it back in. They've decided that actually some of these areas of HR are really key and they don't want to outsource them anymore. So it's all about refining and experimenting with the basic HR model.
And if I can add to that, Marian, what we write in the report, and based on many of the conversations we've had with many executives and companies, is if you're starting the process by asking around org design or what the org chart should look like, we would emphasize that you're perhaps starting with the wrong question, right? Yeah. And to think about asking about the strategy and how best HR can support the business strategy versus asking around. And I get this a lot. I get a lot of questions on how should we align, what's center of excellence, what's not. We all do it differently. Right? In the report, John Deere talks about having a matrix HR organization because that's what their business is. And so they have to have a matrix organization, and that's what they found to best support their businesses. So you need to have those conversations within your own organizations. So not only is it thinking about the org chart and org design from a business perspective, we would also argue that inherently any models that you put in should be considered temporary.
And that's a tough message, I think, Amy. I think that, that is a tough message, but it's an important message. Companies are really finding that it's a fairly stressful process. HR transformation is stressful for HR staff, and especially those who've been in more administrative, transactional areas. To have to perhaps really have your job redefine, to maybe even move. It's hard to then know that actually this might happen again and that you have to keep learning and developing. So that's a tough message.
Absolutely. I was just going to reinforce that. So thank you for saying that. It's really hard for us to keep that in mind, that any structure you put in place, think about it as temporary. We all like our org charts. It provides clarity, right? And so what does that mean? So anyways, let's go on to the next core element. We call it enhancing employee experience. Now, you've heard me say earlier in the webcast that we have a labor talent shortage. We're not, and that will persist, by the way, for the next 10 to 15 years, at least in the United States and in many mature economies. Definitely there's a challenge. And by the way, even in emerging economies, we have data that shows that they're not as dire in a situation as we are in the mature economies, but they still have slowing growth. So talent will continue to be a problem. So what that means is, I have heard an executive say, we are now in the era of the employee. They have choices. They can leave because they will have opportunities elsewhere. So that really puts a lot of pressure on enhancing the employee experience and employee engagement, as well as the entire, it's not just employee engagement, right? It's not just the survey. It's around what are you doing from an employee perspective that really hones in on who they are as individuals and as a demographic, as a population, as a generation, and whatever other groups that they may identify with. How are you addressing some of these needs? So what we see from a transformational process, and you can see the big bubbles across the slide, one size fits all offerings, that evolves into a customized offering, automated self-service offerings, and then continuously scanning for new offerings. Okay? And all of these offerings are benefits, healthcare, not healthcare, teleworking, not teleworking. Right? I've had many conversations with organizations that struggle with, what I would affectionately call global galactic HR policies. We put into place a policy that has to be fair for all, that has to be, available to everyone, whatever that means. So then if you take an approach like teleworking, that may or may not apply to everyone. Right? And so I like to kind of toss out another sort of mental challenge. Is it about fairness? Is it about equity for all across the organization? And you need to really have these conversations around your customized offerings or automated self-selection. And there's a lot of details below each of these phases, as you can see on your slide. There's a lot of details that you can think about and question and have conversations on. But the main point is really around enhancing the employee experience, because they will have choices. They do already, and if they're talented, they're highly skilled, they will leave. And what are we going to do about it? So we have lots of company examples around what organizations are doing in very unique and different ways. Marian, maybe you can jump in there.
Sorry, Amy. Yes, I think the theme of talent, employee experience linked to the theme of talent is absolutely critical. And one of our case studies was really looking at where was the attrition happening? Why was it losing some of its most talented employees? It was a professional services firm. And they figured out that actually people were leaving for job opportunities, didn't necessarily want to be leaving. And they revised, part of their HR transformation is around this whole notion of employee experience, but also really mapping employee experience to different phases of a career, to different types of experiences, to different sets of skills, and to map it out clearly for their employees, so that employees realize that effectively the firm is a big internal labor market and talent market, and that there are opportunities internally. And they use this sort of a sign of an infinity, sort of a flow diagram, just to show people that there are many opportunities within the firm, very flexible, that people can sort of map to what they want to get from their careers. Employee experience was also one of the other case studies we did, absolutely critical. And this company, I think part of it is being fueled by talent, but also some of it, I think, is being fueled by the increasingly customer-focused, outward-focusing perspective of HR. And as their own companies become customer-centric, and they rely on innovation and growth via really understanding customers, understanding customer experience, customer satisfaction, ranging through to customer delight. Lots and lots of evidence, lots of data on that. And HR is starting to appreciate that if you're doing that for your company, for your customer, you really can't then have a complete different mindset for your own employees that you are saying are valued. So they're turning to employee experience to really make the most of their employees and to have that whole integrated, connected thinking about being customer centric. So one company, it's a very famous example where it did a hackathon, a global HR hackathon, and it questioned every element of HR, but it also established about 100 small teams looking at different aspects of HR and resculpturing it in terms of what is the employee experience. They one of the first companies really to go for this sort of banner of moments that matter, looking at significant moments in someone's career. Maybe it's having a baby, maybe it's an elder parent who's about to be put into some sort of residential home, which is a very painful, often transition, but actually just really defining these moments that matter and saying, how can we make it easier for our employees to go through these experiences and to realize that the company is there to positively help them and help them remain focused as well on work and home and the things that matter. So there's some really interesting things going on there, and it's a theme that we saw across all our case studies.
Yeah, absolutely, Marian. And I'd like to also emphasize what you had said, the integration of the employee experience, having HR think about the employee from the beginning, the minute they get that offer letter, all the way in to when they leave the company. Many of us in HR have always worked in fairly siloed organizations, where we do training here, we do onboarding here, we do succession planning there, performance management, but thinking through holistically around the employee experience, not just the benefits that you're offering, but how are you putting them through a learning development experience, the career development experience, the succession planning experience, right? All of these now become holistic experiences that require a number of different elements of HR or departments of HR, right? It's not just the siloed type of approach to employee experiences. And that's a very dramatic shift from what I would say traditional HR operated in. And we see so many different examples. Organizations are not limited at all by the innovation, the creativity, apps that they're doing for this. Onboarding, by the way, I have an organization that has it rolled out a new app just to help employees navigate a new site that they have as a new employee. It's so complex, something like 35 buildings, acronyms everywhere, where to find lunch type app. All of that is part of the employee experience as they are onboarding with an organization, all the way to retention. And we'll talk a little bit more about analytics in a moment, but organizations that we work with now are using analytics to figure out when an employee is likely to leave an organization, right? And red flags go up if you're high potential, you're a superstar. What does that mean for the organization? So these are all tangible examples of today. They're not theoretical or something aspiring to in the future. So from the beginning to the end is all part of the employee experience. We have the next element, delivering impact and value as a core element of what to focus on when you're transforming HR. And so this is where, of course, we like to say HR always delivers value. How are you delivering value? Are you able to articulate how you are delivering value, and you're able to sell that? Right? That's a big part of what value are you delivering. We have organizations trying now, experimenting. They actually will do mini pilot tests of new HR approaches or initiatives in different ways, whether it's a different population or different geography or different site or function, etc. So they are using that fail fast and learn faster approach by tossing it out and then figuring out how they can deliver value in that quick way. So that's just a quick example, and I'm going to ask Marion to take a deeper dive into some other examples. But it's really, how are you defining that value, streamlining that value, and of course, ultimately creating the value within the business. And you can see at the fourth column, value outside in the external community. That's also a whole new element that HR historically did not focus on. So Marion, please.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the conversation that HR is now having around value is an absolute critical component of HR transformation. If HR doesn't have a really clear vision of how it can benefit the business, how it can keep moving ever deeper into that area of being a strategic partner, and maybe even beyond that to being one of an anticipator. And we're starting to do a little bit of research into that. What does it mean to be an anticipator? And I think that we saw in our research that this conversation has to take place with the whole of the HR function. It also has to take part with the executive teams of business units and the C-suite. And it's got to be something really compelling, because HR transformation requires such a lot of energy and resources that you really have to have a clear sense of what you're doing and why you're doing it and why it really is worth the pain. And it is individual to the companies. I guess if I had to pull out one that we saw in our case studies, is very much around talent, very much around really delivering what the company needs in terms of talent now, medium term, the long term, particularly talent in the face of disruptive competition, massive change in the environment outside. So one of our companies, John Deere, talent was absolutely the language of HR transformation. And this is a business that was once upon a time a very traditional engineering and construction business, and now increasingly is moving into self-driving tractors, the whole technology of self-driving, and also using drones over farms to analyze masses of data about the fields and crops, et cetera, et cetera. This is high tech. This is leading edge stuff. And to keep up, HR and John Deere has really reorganized itself around sort of talent teams. It's working for a great big global business that also has a very complex matrix structure. So this has been a real challenge for HR transformation. And so John Deere has really sort of revised its HR model around managing talent globally, managing talent across the business. So I think that this is the conversation about value is hugely important, and for some of our other companies, value is around flexibility. Some of our case studies, one company has now different types of business models within its global business. So it has some traditional businesses, but it also has some businesses where it's incubating innovation, where it's perhaps adopted a very different approach. It's got companies that have moved from being product-based to being solutions-based, and maybe even offering consultancy. And keeping up and helping to design these new business models and ensuring that HR is supporting these businesses is a massive source of value in that company. So it's all about having that conversation and really ensuring that everybody joins in.
Terrific. And I actually see there's a question from the audience. So first, thank you very much. And please feel free to continue to type in your questions in your lower left-hand box. What tools are available for companies to use that want to summarize the feedback they are hearing from employees through various different mediums, social media, engagement surveys, exit interviews, etc. So that is obviously a very, very broad question. And I will tell you that companies that I'm talking to are trying everything out. There is no one tool, one way, excuse me. There's no one survey that companies are trying. They're doing all of the above, whether it's an app, whether it's pulse surveys, whether it's once a year, quarterly, now I'm hearing employees or companies are trying performance review after projects, not even sort of once a year or twice a year. They're doing it after every project. And what does that mean? And so all the feedback we're seeing companies try and do many different ways. There might not be one perfect way to go about it depending on the size of your organization. You may have to use all of the above. The challenge is not only just the tool, but what do you do with all that information? How are you able to synthesize and articulate that and then bring some insight into then perhaps affecting changes in approaches or programs or policies, etc. Which actually leads us to the next, I'm going to say just in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to the next two components, which is called applying HR technology. And then the next one is using human capital analytics. Now, the reason why we've actually separated it, they're obviously closely linked, but we've separated it because they were very different. And let me explain. Applying HR technology is about using basic anything technology related to help you execute HR task. And sometimes that's administrative, whether it's payroll or sometimes it's about benefits, sometimes it's more. Like at the app that I mentioned around sort of helping new employees on board to this complicated organization. Applying HR technology is about doing things faster, streamlined, more efficient, cost savings. Right? Anything that helps you from a technology perspective do all of those things and automate them and do it faster, great. That's HR technology. When we get into using human capital analytics, that takes it to a whole new level. Of course, you need tools and technology to help you get to the analytics, but analytics, the way we define it, is it helps you to drive decision making. It's not just about making things faster or cheaper or more efficient. It actually brings you insights that will then help drive decision making. So, for example, if you're on the activating column, if you will, the phase, you might be just simply identifying capabilities for leveraging data. But as you sort of evolve and transform, you might be able to begin using business intelligence and data warehousing tools to lead talent and business conversations. Or you're continuing to leverage advanced intelligence and then predicting workforce trends and habits, right? Those types of insights can help drive decision making around where you might build a new site, where you might expand your business. You can expand all you want, but if you don't have the talent to support that expansion, it's not going to be a successful business strategy, right? And that will get the attention of the C-suite. It's great that the business strategy wants to do that, but we don't have a way to figure out how to support the talent around that. How do you develop HR skills around confidence to delve into data-driven strategies? And how do you transform and continuously transform by predicting future risk, benefits, prescribing strategies based on the business need, where you're able to take that talent information and build on that? So lots of great examples. Human capital analytics is definitely a sort of new territory for human capital and HR in general, but we are seeing companies digging in and working hard and building fast, actually. And Marion, I wondered if you could share some examples.
Yeah, I think, Amy, that one of our case studies, RBS, their current stage of HR transformation has really been built around the use of human capital analytics. And it's part of their enormous value of evidence-based management and evidence-based decisions. And so they are experimenting as a whole. The function is experimenting with new technologies and cognitive computing, but they've really pulled together and consolidated all the different human capital analytics sort of exercises that they were doing, and they've pulled it together into very much an integrated system. So I think they might have had something like 100 different surveys that were going on historically, but anyway, they pulled it together into this whole concept of employee listening and a one bank approach. And so they now are building, their focus is to build what they're sort of calling integrated insight for decision making and action. And a range of assessments and surveys and employee listening exercises have now been sort of pulled together. And from them, they are producing metrics on employee engagement, line management effectiveness, operational effectiveness, leadership, and culture. And then they are using that to have real insight into how well the business as a whole is performing and different parts of the business are performing. And then HR is then working with business unit leadership teams, bringing them this data. And sometimes it gives surprises, unexpected results, new patterns. I think it's very much shown them the huge connection between, leadership, employee engagement, and, performance of that unit. And in a more recent development, they're also using the analytics to tie it to the company's own service profit chain. And so some of the analytics they're doing, they're actually trying to get a clear line of sight between an employee's ability to really serve a customer, to be customer centric, and what HR is doing for them. So for some hard hitting analysis of what difference is HR making to you as you serve our customers. So human capital analytics is really powering transformation at RBS.
And there's so many more examples that we have of companies using human capital analytics and going into the predictive realm, right? This is a little bit more in a more advanced stages. We have organizations that are very talent dependent from a geography perspective, and they have implemented a predictive analytics index, if you will. They take a aggregation of different points of data from external to the company and internal to the company. And basically, red flags will go up when they have an indicator that says this geography is going to have a talent shortage and they won't be able to deliver their customer needs because of that talent shortage. So then what they do is, because the flag went up, they send extra recruiters, they do campaigns, right, to try to bring in maybe bonuses or etc., referral programs. It actually doesn't matter. The fact is that they have an advanced lead, and it's not 100% accurate, by the way. They don't need it to be 100% accurate. Even 70% accurate gives them a strong indication that there's going to be a problem, and they're able to tackle that problem before the problem actually occurs from a talent perspective. That's helpful to the business strategy. That will not ruin their reputation from a customer perspective. And they can do that on the talent acquisition side. And I told you earlier, on the talent retention side, if individuals are looking to leave and they're high potentials, right? So I guess we would argue that if organizations can do it from a beginning acquisition level and exiting from a retention perspective, that means everything in the middle, development, leadership, performance management, succession, all of it can be implemented with analytics. We just haven't figured it all out yet. But lots of companies are doing it, and lots of companies are working hard and experimenting. So I would challenge you to go and think about that for your organization. And finally, the sixth component, building HR strategic capacity. These are about the skills, the capabilities, and the mindsets for ourselves as HR. Right? If we expect our employees to evolve and develop new skill sets, it's not possible for HR not to also evolve and develop new skill sets. And what does that mean? So what we have, and by the way, one of the questions that came in, how do you measure or figure out if you're having an impact to your transformational efforts? And this is where our diagnostic tool comes into play, that you all have access to and can download off our internet. It has all of these slides in greater detail, and it's only 3 pages, so it's much more maneuverable. And these are, the details on these slides are basically items to think about, items to reflect upon. Are you in the initial stages of the activation, or are you scaling, or are you sustaining, or continuously transforming? That'll give you a sense of sort of quote unquote measuring your journey in the process, and whether you're able to move it along, and whether you're focusing on the right things to help you continue to move along that transformation and have those conversations. So with this component, the HR strategic capacity, we're seeing a lot of organizations recognize and realizing that many of us ourselves are not quite ready to handle this transformation and are not quite prepared to support our business leaders as they also transform their businesses. So Marion, I wondered if you have some thoughts around this.
Yeah, Amy, I think I think that there's a huge challenge for businesses who are going through transformation because I think in terms of building this very agile, very flexible HR capability, it does require really investing in the development of your HR staff. And if you're going to overcome silos as well, this is a challenge in that if you have HR staff who were in an admin capacity and perhaps you're moving, you need them to have a better strategic understanding of the business, trying to understand what HR is about so that they really see the big picture. That's very demanding, very challenging. And a lot of companies as well are really, really concentrating on improving the performance and the capabilities of their HR BP business partners. And that's a theme that we saw, I think, across many of our case studies of really trying to get BPs across the whole organization up to a consistently high standard, but really developing their strategic skills, their commercial acumen, their ability to speak the language of the business to their executive teams, and to join in that global HR-wide conversation that is an absolute inherent part of HR transformation. So some of our case studies were investing impressive sums of money into development opportunities for HR people. One company had recently added to its own internal university a whole stable of courses for HR to really acquire very specific skills and just generally really improve their business awareness. One company has really looked very seriously at career paths for its HR people. And it's a real challenge of how do we give them the experiences that they need? How do we move them around when, the path going to a center of expertise versus a path going towards shared services or HR business partner? Those paths are starting to look quite different. So how do we try and rotate people? How do we get internal mobility? How do we try and make sure that people stay flexible? And I think one of the interesting questions that I received from a company the other day that's in the middle of transformation was saying that actually they're moving to a model where their HR business partners are single contributors. They're working on their own. They're working very closely with their own executive team within a business unit. And those business units vary hugely in their nature and the markets that they're serving. And so a question for that organization is how do we make sure that these people don't get overly specialized in that particular business? How do we make sure that they have transferable skills? How do we make sure as well that they keep really plugged in to the global HR function and the strategy for the whole enterprise? So some really hard questions around building HR capability.
Thanks, Marion. I'm also realizing we only have just about 2 more minutes left. So let me quickly finish this element. Lots of things going on around building our capability and organizations trying, again, different and experimenting with different programs. So one strong element we would obviously encourage all of us not to forget. And the pace of transformation, it depends. This is what the slide is talking about. It depends on your company. There is no recipe for how you're going to change. It might depend on your structure. It may depend on your cultural readiness. It may depend on the politics going on in the organization. Lots of things that will impact your pace of transformation. And then, of course, we would finally add, what is your role? How can you play a part in helping your function transform? And these are some of the elements to think about in the report, which, by the way, all of you have access to. So there was a question around accessing the report. You just log in and you can see it on our webpage, including that diagnostic tool that I mentioned. A quick question that came in: is there a set of competencies that many companies will need to build? We've done some research around, it's not just about functional. We all need functional skills, but think about skills like ability to make sense of chaos, right? Or ability to make meaning out of chaos. Ability to seek opportunities out of challenges. These are some of the agility. How do we learn and be more agile? Agile learner, if you will. Different elements like that is what we're seeing as a need and a desire, given that different skills will age very, very quickly in our business environments. And so let me conclude by saying we do have our next month labor Human Capital Watch with a labor market update from our very own Dr. Gad Lebanon, who's the Chief Economist for North America. I started out earlier this webcast by emphasizing to you the importance of understanding labor markets as it relates to our HR work. Dr. Gad Lebanon is the perfect person to help you continue that journey and learn that and realize that it is really critical and helps to us to speak the language of the business. So I encourage you to join in that conversation. Let me thank my co-researcher and colleague, Marion Devine, for joining me today. And I want to thank all of you for joining me today on this conversation. Please complete the evaluation. We look forward to hearing from you. And we hope that you were able to take a couple of nuggets from today and continue this conversation with your colleagues. I'm Amy Abel, and this is from the Conference Board.